Have you ever wondered why certain truths seem to be forgotten or even erased from history? What might the Bible not have told you about the most mysterious and powerful moments in the life of Jesus of Nazareth? And why has Hollywood, with all its power, tried to silence those who dared to show this truth? In this video, we'll reveal what many avoid talking about: the spiritual underbelly, the conflicts with the industry, and the true mission. Behind The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel didn't just tell a story, they took on the system with faith, courage, and purpose. If you feel like there's something bigger behind all this, stay with me until the end. And if this content touches you in any way, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, we're not afraid to go deep. And in the comments, I want to invite you to leave the phrase, "The truth cannot be silenced." That way I will. Know that you stayed until the end and that you are also part of this journey. Mel Gibson is a name that conjures up images of strength, determination, and talent. But few know the dark behind-the-scenes details and the personal cost he faced when deciding to direct and produce The Passion of the Christ, one of the most controversial and impactful films in the history of cinema. This story is not just about cinema, fame, or controversy. It is a tale of faith, sacrifice, and the invisible price of following a deep conviction in a hostile environment like Hollywood. When Mel Gibson announced his desire to tell the story of Jesus' crucifixion with brutal honesty, he didn't expect the entertainment industry to react with such resistance. Major studios rejected his project, concerned that what they called the subject matter was unprofitable and too controversial. Showing Jesus suffering while remaining faithful to the biblical story was not safe for executives who preferred predictable, easy-to-sell stories. To many, the film seemed like a huge risk, perhaps even professional suicide, but Gibson didn't give up. He staked his own money, his reputation, and his career on a dream that, to him, was a mission greater than anything else. It wasn't just a movie. It was a call to show the sacrifice and raw truth behind the story of Jesus, something few in Hollywood dared to do. Finding the right actor to play Jesus was another major challenge. When Gibson met Jim Caviezel, he recognized in him something beyond ordinary talent. Caviezel was not just a hand-picked actor, he was someone who would give himself completely to the role, not just play Jesus, but try to live his essence. This commitment would come at an unimaginable cost, a price that Gibson had already warned Caviezel before filming even began. "If you take this role, you can forget about ever working in this town again," Gibson told Caviezel. It was a stark and true warning. Playing Jesus, especially in Hollywood at that time, meant being the target of criticism, rejection, and even ostracism. Many actors would have recoiled at such a warning, but Caviezel saw it not as a threat, but as a calling. For him, accepting the role of Jesus was not just a professional opportunity, but a profound spiritual commitment. It was embracing his cross, carrying a burden that is not limited to the film set, but that spans his entire life. This courage to face the unknown, to follow a tortuous path of faith and resistance, is what makes this story so powerful. When The Passion of the Christ finally premiered in 2004, the film exploded into a cultural phenomenon. With a relatively modest budget, it grossed over $600 million, exceeding expectations and deeply touching millions of people around the world. The film was not just a commercial production, but a spiritual experience for many. However, the box office success did not erase the controversy. The graphic depiction of Jesus' suffering divided opinion. For some, it was a masterpiece of courage and fidelity. For others, a polarizing and even offensive film. Behind the scenes in Hollywood, the reaction was even colder. Directors, producers, and studios who had previously seen Jim Caviezel as a promising prospect began to see him as a risk. His job opportunities dwindled dramatically, and the actor suffered rejection and isolation. But Caviezel had no regrets. He understood that this was the price of his choice, a necessary sacrifice to remain faithful to his calling. In his own words, playing Jesus was not just a role, it was a spiritual transformation that changed his life forever. He found himself closer to faith and also forced to re-evaluate his personal relationships and priorities. During filming, Caviezel experienced experiences that went beyond ordinary acting. In one of the most iconic scenes, hanging on the cross under harsh conditions, he felt a supernatural presence, a pause in time that made him feel something beyond the physical. This moment was neither frightening nor painful, but rather a glimpse of something greater, a deep connection with the essence of the sacrifice he was representing. This kind of commitment required not only courage, but also physical and emotional endurance. Imagine hanging on a cross, exposed to the cold, wind and rain, for hours on end, while the camera captures every expression of pain and despair. This total immersion in the role required a commitment from Caviezel that few actors are willing to make. The experience also made Caviezel reflect on Jesus' words, especially those that speak of the cost of following him. Jesus said he did not come to bring peace, but a sword, a symbol of the divisions that faith can bring into our lives. For Caviezel, that meant being prepared to lose important people, break old patterns, and face criticism without backing down. Hollywood, with all its glitter and fame, is a ruthless environment full of personal interests, power games, and betrayals. Mel Gibson, when he became a filmmaker and not just an actor, saw this dark side of the industry firsthand. He discovered that telling stories, especially those that challenge the status quo, is a constant battle against interests that do not always have truth or faith as their priority. For Gibson, this struggle has been both professional and personal. He has often felt isolated, betrayed by people he once considered allies, and constantly challenged by a system that has no tolerance for breaking its unwritten rules. Hollywood may be glamorous on the surface, but to those on the inside, it is a place where loyalty is fragile and trust is rare. Yet both Gibson and Caviezel remained steadfast, driven by a deep conviction that the story they were telling was worth every sacrifice. The Passion of the Christ was not just a movie for them. It was a mission that impacted their spiritual and professional lives, leaving a lasting impression. This story of courage, faith, and resilience invites us to reflect on what we would be willing to sacrifice to follow what we believe to be true. Would we have the strength to embrace our own crosses, even knowing that it could mean losing everything? The example of Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel is an invitation to think about the value of faith in a world that often rejects what is different and authentic. They show us that sometimes true triumph lies not in the approval of others, but in being faithful to oneself and to what one believes to be one's greater purpose. Caviezel's career changed dramatically and, for many, unexpectedly. Before the film, he was seen as a promising actor, with interesting roles and potential to grow in Hollywood. But after taking on the role of Jesus, the reality that awaited him was very different. Soon after the premiere, Caviezel began to feel the isolation that Mel Gibson had predicted. His job offers dwindled considerably, and he realized that he had become persona non grata to many producers and directors. The reason was clear. Playing Jesus at that time was not something that Hollywood looked upon favorably. It was almost like a stigma, a label that closed doors instead of opening them. In addition to the professional boycott, Caviezel faced a veritable storm of criticism and accusations. Some people accused him of using the film to proselytize religion, while others criticized him for his performance and even for his personal beliefs. The polarization surrounding the film was intense, and he found himself in the middle of a crossfire that few actors can withstand. Despite all this pressure, Caviezel remained firm in his decision. He knew that the role was not just a job, but a choice that reflected his commitment to his faith and values. For him, the rejection from the market and the loss of opportunities were a small price to pay compared to the spiritual significance that the work carried. This separation from the industry, however, had a profound impact on his personal life. An actor's routine is marked by a constant flow of work, travel and meetings that help to maintain motivation and contact with the artistic world. When these doors close, the feeling of loneliness and exclusion can be overwhelming. Caviezel began to focus more on his personal projects, avoiding the pressure of trying to please everyone. This attitude also led him to choose roles that were more aligned with his principles, even if they were not the most lucrative or popular. This choice, although courageous, also required financial and social sacrifices. On the other hand, the impact of the film was far greater than he could have imagined. Millions of people around the world watched the film and were deeply touched by its message of sacrifice and redemption. Caviezel's role became iconic, a visual representation that many came to associate directly with Jesus. The film's impact also opened up a space for dialogue about faith, art, and the challenges of producing a work that does not fit into traditional commercial standards. The film generated debates about the relationship between religion and cinema, and about the extent to which a film can or should be faithful to a religious narrative without losing its artistic function. Behind all this discussion, what is clear is the courage of Gibson and Caviezel in betting on a story that seemed impossible to tell with such sincerity. They chose a path that required sacrifice and resistance, a path that few would be willing to follow. This sacrifice, however, was not in vain. Despite the challenges, The Passion of the Christ remains one of the most watched and discussed films in history, a work that transcends cultural and religious barriers. The message of love and redemption that it conveys resonates in many hearts to this day. For Jim Caviezel, this experience marked not only his career, but also his spiritual life. He began to live his faith more intensely, always seeking to align his professional choices with his personal values. This attitude, although difficult in a competitive market like Hollywood, brought him peace and authenticity. And what about Mel Gibson? For him, the film was also a transformation. He began to be seen not only as an actor and director, but as someone willing to face the industry and culture to tell the story he believed was important. This position, although risky, guaranteed him a unique legacy in cinema. What this story teaches us is that following a greater purpose may require us to give up many things, including external recognition and immediate success. But this sacrifice can make room for something even more valuable, the profound fulfillment of being aligned with what we truly believe. It is a reflection that goes beyond the world of cinema, reaching our daily lives. How many times have we stopped following our dreams or values for fear of judgment, failure, or rejection? Gibson and Caviezel's journey reminds us that, despite the risks, the courage to be authentic can be transformative. This story also invites us to look at challenges differently. Instead of seeing obstacles as punishments or signs to give up, we can see them as proof of the strength of our commitment and the meaning of the path we have chosen to follow. Ultimately, The Passion of the Christ and its protagonists show us that true victory does not lie in pleasing everyone or in accumulating fleeting success, but in remaining faithful to our calling, even if that means carrying the cross alone. Even after years of silence from the mainstream media and their retreat from the mainstream Hollywood scene, both Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel never completely abandoned their desire to continue the message that began in The Passion of the Christ. There was something bigger there, a drive that went beyond commercial success, beyond applause or critical acclaim. It was a mission, and missions don't end just because the world stops applauding. For years, rumors circulated about a possible sequel. Many considered the idea bold, even unlikely. After all, how can you continue a story that ends with the death, or rather, the resurrection, of the protagonist? But that is precisely where the power of this narrative lies. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was not the end, it was the beginning. And it was this beginning that Mel Gibson wanted to explore. The 3 days that changed the destiny of humanity. The time between death and the victory over death. Gibson quietly began work on a new script. With the same meticulous care he had given to the first film, he delved into biblical scholarship, apocryphal texts, ancient traditions, and theological commentary. He didn't want to simply tell a visually striking story. He wanted to be faithful to the spiritual depth of the event. This new project was called The Resurrection of the Christ, and from the beginning it was treated with almost sacred respect. Jim Caviezel, in turn, accepted the invitation to return to the role of Jesus. Even though he knew that reviving this character could rekindle difficulties and rejection, he did not hesitate. In interviews, he stated that he felt that this was his mission, that he had been called not only to act, but to serve as a channel for something greater. The commitment between the two artists was sealed again, not by million-dollar contracts, but by faith. The development of the new film faced numerous challenges: financing, critical reception, veiled censorship, disinterest from major studios. It was as if the world was afraid of the message that this story could carry. In an increasingly fast-paced culture focused on superficial spectacle, talking about transcendence, redemption, and deep spirituality was almost an act of resistance. But Gibson and Caviezel remained steadfast. For them, what mattered was not the number of theaters or the social media hype, but the quiet, lasting impact the film could have on people. It was about touching people's minds, not algorithms. In preparation for the role, Caviezel again spent time reflecting, fasting, and praying. He wanted to be completely in tune with what he was portraying. After all, this wasn't just any character. It was a living representation of the most sacred moment in the Christian faith, the triumph of life over death. He knew he had to do this with reverence and truth. The script is not limited to the resurrection scene. It delves into the spiritual and symbolic events that took place in the 3 days between the crucifixion and the return of Jesus. The film aims to show what human eyes could not see, the confrontation in the spiritual dimensions, the meaning of the descent into Hades, the moment of liberation of the imprisoned souls, and the tearing of the veil between heaven and earth. A bold, poetic, and deeply mystical narrative. The idea is to show not only the historical aspect of the resurrection, but also the eternal impact that this act has had on humanity and on each individual who decides to follow this path. It is a film about hope, about transformation, and about the power of light in the midst of darkness. It is not just a cinematic continuation, it is a spiritual continuation of the call that began with the Passion of the Christ. At the same time, Caviezel also began to get involved with social causes, mainly focused on protecting children and combating human trafficking. This new position led him to participate in films such as Sound of Freedom, where he played a real agent who risks everything to save children from exploitative networks. The film, like The Passion, was ignored by major media outlets, but became a popular phenomenon, sparking profound discussions and mobilizing millions. This new phase of Caviezel's life is marked by a courage that is rare in Hollywood. He has set aside conventional scripts, awards shows, and appearances to dedicate himself to real, human, and spiritual causes. He understands that his role as an artist is not just to entertain, but to enlighten. Mel Gibson, for his part, remains an enigma to the industry. While many still try to cancel him for past opinions or for his firm stance, he remains a resilient, creative, and daring figure. His commitment to the new film is more than artistic, it is almost priestly. He sees cinema as a tool for spiritual transformation, a bridge between the visible and the invisible. And what about the audience? The audience that connected with the original message continues to wait, in silence, in faith, because they know that something is being prepared, something that, like the first time, will not be just a film, but an experience. This waiting carries within itself the strength of the seed. It is not about anxiety for entertainment, but about expectation for something that touches the soul. In a world saturated with disposable narratives, there is still room for stories that become eternal. And this space is filled by those who have the courage to hear the call, even if it costs their career, fame, or comfort. Caviezel's return as Jesus, directed again by Gibson, is not just an artistic decision. It is a living testament to faith and perseverance. It is the continuation of a journey that for many began inside movie theaters, but has extended into hearts. While the film is still in production, the impact has already begun to be felt. Thousands of people around the world are already mobilizing, sharing, waiting, and praying for this new project, because they know that something bigger is coming, something that transcends cinema. If this video touched you in any way, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next ones. And if you stayed this far, comment the word faith in the comments, just so I know that you are one of those who stay until the end.